bright shone the sun on battlement and tower, and in the blue bore air overhead a hook of chattering jackdaws flew around the glinting weather vane and spear. Then in the brightness of the morning, the drawbridge fell across the moat with a rattle and clack of chains. The gate of the castle swung slowly open, and a goodly array of steel-clad men-at-arms, with a knight all covered in chainmail, as white as frost on beryl and thorn of a winter morning, came flashing out from the castle's courtyard. In his hand the knight held a great spear, from the point of which fluttered a blood-red pennant, as broad as the palm of one's hand. So this troop came forth from the castle, and in the midst of them walked 3 pack horses, laden with parcels of divers shapes and kinds. Thus rode forth good Sir Richard of the Lea to pay his debt to Robin Hood this bright and merry morn. Along the highway they wended their way, with measured tramp of feet and rattle of jingles of swords and harnesses. Onwards they marched till they came nigh to Derby, where, from the top of a hill, they saw over beyond the town many gay flags and steamers floating in the bright air. Then Sir Richard turned to the man-at-arms nearest to him. "What is toward yonder at Derby today?" quoth he. "Please your worship," answered the man-at-arms, "a merry fair is held here today, and a great wrestling match, to which many folks have come. For a prize hath it been offered of a pipe of red wine, a fair golden ring, and a pair of gloves, all of which go to the best wrestler. Now, by my faith," quoth Sir Richard, "who loveth good manly sport right well. This will be a goodly thing to see. Methinkest we have to stay a little while on our journey, and see this merry sport." So he turned his horse aside towards Derby and the fair, and therehiver he and his men made their way. There they found a great habit of merriment. Flags and steamers were floating, trumpets were trumpeting on the green, bagpipes were playing, and lads and lasses were dancing to the music. But the crowd were gathered around a ring where the wrestling was going forth, and thither Sir Richard and his men turned their steps. Now, when the judges of the wrestling saw Sir Richard coming and knew who he was, the chief of them came down from the bench where he and the others sat, and went to the knight and took him by the hand, beseeching him to come and sit with them and judge the sport. So Sir Richard got down from his horse and went with the others to the bench rising beside the ring. Now there had been great doings that morning, for a certain yeoman named Egbert, who came from Stoke over the Staffordshire, had thrown with ease all those that came against him. But a man of Derby, well known through all the countryside as William of the Scar, had been bidding this time with the Stoke man, so when Egbert had thrown everyone else, stout William leaped into the ring. Then a through-brew followed, and at least he threw Egbert heavily, where was a great shouting and shaking of hands, and for all the Derby men were proud of their wrestler. When Sir Richard came, he found stout William, puffed up by the shouts of his friends, walking up and down the ring, daring everyone to come and try and throw with him. "Come on! Come one, come all," quoth he. "Here stand I, William of the Scar, against any man. If there is none in Derbyshire to come against me, come all who will, from Nottingham, Stratford, or York, and I do not make them one and all rot the ground with their noses like swine in the forests. Call me no more brave William the Wrestler." At this all laughed, but above all the laughter a loud voice was heard to cry out, "Sin, thou talkest so big. Here cometh one from Nottinghamshire to try a fall with thee, fellow." And straightway a tall young youth with a third quarterstaff in his hand came pushing his way through the crowd, and at least leaped lightly off the rope into the ring. He was not as heavy as stout William, but he was a taller and broader in the shoulders, and all his joints were well knit. Sir Richard looked upon him keenly. Then, turning to one of the judges, he said, "Knowest thou this youth?" "Methinkest I have seen him before." "Nay," said the judges, "he is a stranger to me." Meanwhile, without a word, the young man, laying aside his quarterstaff, began to take off his jerkin and body clothing until he presently stood with naked arms and body. And a comely sight he was, when so bared to the view, for his muscles were cut round and smooth and sharp like swift running water. And now each man sat upon his hands, and clapping them up on the knees, squatted down, watching the other keenly, so as to take the vantage of him in the grip. Then like a flash they leaped together, and a great shout went up, for William had gotten the better hold of the two. For a short time they strained and struggled and writhed, and then stout William gave his most cunning trip and throw, but the stranger met it with greater skill than his, and so the trip came to naught. Then of a sudden, with a twist and a wrench, the stranger loosed him, and he of the scar found himself locked in a pair of arms that fairly made his ribs crack. So with a heavy, hot breathing, they stood for a while straining, their bodies all glistering with sweat, and great drops of sweat trickling down their faces. But the stranger's hug was so close that at least stout William's muscles soothed under his grip, and he gave a sob. Then the youth put forward all his strength and gave a sudden trip with his heels and a cast over his right rib, and down stout William went with a sickening throat, and laid as though he would never move hand nor foot again. But now no shout went up for the stranger, but an angry murmur was heard among the crowd. So easily had he won the match. Then one of the judges, a kinsman to William of the Scar, rose with trembling lips and baleful look. Quoth he, "So have slain this man, it will go ill with thee. Let me tell thee, fellow." But the stranger answered boldly, "He took his chance with me as I took with him. No law can touch me to harm me, even if I slew him, so that it was fairly done in a wrestling ring." "That we shall see," said the judge, scowling upon the youth, while once more an angry murmur ran around the crowd. For, as I have said, the man of Derby was proud of stout William of the Scar. Then up spoke Sir Richard gently. "Nay," said he, "the youth is right. If the abbot dieth, he dieth in a wrestling ring, where he took his chance and was cast fairly in no. But in the meantime 3 men had come forward and lifted stout William from the ground, and found that he was not dead, though badly shaken with his heavy fall. Then the chief judge rose and said, "Young man, the prize is duly thine. Here is the red gold ring, and here the gloves, and yonder stage the pipe of wine, to do with whatsoever thou doest list." As this the youth, who had donned his clothes and taken up the staff again, bowed without a word. Then, taking his gloves and the ring, and thrusting the one into his girdle and slipping the other up onto his thumb, he turned and, leaping lightly over the ropes again, made his way through the crowd and was gone. "Now I wonder who that youth may be," said the judge, turning to Sir Richard. "He seems like a stout Saxon from his red cheeks and his fair hair." "This William of ours is a stout man too, and never have I seen him cast in a ring before, albeit he hath not yet striven with such great wrestlers as Thomas of Cornwall, Dickon of York, and young David of Dorchester. Hath he not a firm foot in the ring, thinkest thou, Sir Richard?" "Ay, truly, and yet this youth threw him fairly, and without wondrous ease. I much wonder who he can be." "Thus, sir," said Sir Richard, and in his faithful voice. For a time the knight stood talking to those around him, but at least he arose and made ready to depart. So he called his men about him, and, tightening the girths of his saddle, he mounted his horse once more. Meanwhile the youth stranger had made his way through the crowd, but as he passed he heard all around him such words muttered as, "Look at the cockerel! Behold how he plummeth himself! I dare swear he cast good William unfairly. Yea, truly saw ye not build lime up on his hands? It would be well to cut his comps." To all the strangers paid he no heed, but strode proudly as though he had it not. So he walked slowly across the green to where the booth stood wherein was dancing, and standing at the door he looked in on the sport. As he stood thus, a stone struck his arm of a sudden with a sharp jaw, and turning he saw that an angry crowd of men had followed him from the wrestling ring. Then, when they saw him turn so, a great hooting and yelling arose from all, so that the folk came running out from the dancing booth to see what was to do. At least a tall, broad-shouldered, burly blacksmith stalked forward from the crowd, swinging a mighty blackthorn club in his hand.